archives are. We have a big office in Ramallah. We have a very small office in DC. But all three of them are generating some of the materials that people have relied upon now for 60 years, over 60 years, to understand the Palestine question, to understand the background of what's going on. And it involves not just documentation, it involves analysis, it involves a huge amount of work, which together with the work of many, 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 many other academics, I think has helped to shape the discourse that we now see finally reaching the public in a way that it never, ever in the history of the whole 100-year war, 100-something-year war, it ever did. It's not just very dedicated student and other activists. It's not just the alternative and independent and social media. It's not just live stream genocide that's changed people's minds and has opened them up to the fact there is a Palestinian narrative, and it includes a lot more than a lot more sensible, logical, rational, factual, objective truth than the stuff that's parroted by the mainstream media or most of our corrupt politicians. And that is a result of a lot of hard work over several generations. I mean, when you think of over 60 years of work, you're talking about really 2 or 3 generations of scholars who have been working on this subject, some of them since they were young men and women back in the 50s and 60s and 70s. And that has produced a journal in Arabic, a journal, 2 journals in English, the Journal of Palestine Studies and the Jerusalem Quarterly. And you can talk about changes in public opinion, and you can talk about changes, even in the beginnings of changes in politics, simply in terms of, opinion polling, or simply in terms of the horrifying impact of what we've seen for the last 2 years. But that rests on a foundation, and that foundation was produced by many, many people, many of them in the Middle East, many of them, some of them Israelis, many of them American scholars. But a lot of that stuff was produced by or supported by the Institute for Palestine Studies. I will give you just one example. The Journal of Palestine Studies has a huge history of publishing analytical and documentary material on Palestine, on the struggle over Palestine, on Israel, on Zionism, on a range of international politics in the region. Over the last year and a half, there have been over 1 million downloads of full articles from the Journal of Palestine Studies. 1 million people downloaded. They didn't just click on a link. They downloaded full articles, 1 million articles. Think about how many graduate students, how many journalists, how many activists, how many academics have accessed serious peer-reviewed material on Palestine in 1 year and a half. And that doesn't even account for the people who back in the old days went to the library and actually read paper versions of the journal. We don't know how many people were affected that way, but that's just one example of the kind of reach that this kind of work does. And it tells us something, which is that change does not come because people are angry and involved. Change comes over time by dedicated, determined, sustained, long-term work. Change doesn't come because I want it to come. I was an undergraduate back in the Vietnam War days. We wanted the war to stop immediately. It took 10 years to stop that war. And it wasn't just what students like me and others did on campuses. It was a whole network of things, churches, unions, individuals all over the country who finally changed the discourse against the will of the foreign policy establishment, against the will of the political establishment. But it didn't happen in 1 day or because of one demonstration or a year of demonstrations. It happened because of sustained work, including work by scholars on Southeast Asia, who told the American public about the realities of Southeast Asia. And what I hope the Institute is able to do is to provide, together with others, obviously, the basis for that kind of a change. It's happening globally. It's not just happening here. That change is beginning in public opinion all over Europe, all over Latin America, all over different countries, Southeast Asia and other parts of Asia, in ways that in many cases go against the wishes of the governments, which would rather go along to get along They'd much rather do whatever the United States wants. It's much easier to do whatever American president happens to be bullying them or wants them to do. And those governments are being forced by public opinion to take stands that they would never, ever, under any circumstances, have taken in the past. The Meloni government sending a frigate to escort the Sumud flotilla, not into Palestinian territorial waters, but close, would never have happened in the past. She was forced to do that. It was a government whose political base is in the fascist, neo-fascist movement in Italy. These are the people who handed Italian Jews over to the Nazis, their intellectual forebears. Their alliance with Israel is a function of their protecting themselves against the legitimate charge that they are an anti-Semitic political party. And yet this government has taken steps, and you say in Arabic, against their own will to do things because of pressure from below. And you see that happening in countries like Brazil, you see it in Chile, Colombia, you see it in many, many other countries. The Starmer government is forced to do things it would never have done. Labour Party has never, ever been anything but a dedicated supporter of Zionism and a dedicated supporter of Israel since its very foundation. And so I think that we can all look at this moment that we're in where things do seem to be changing. And we may think, well, this is because of the incredible determination and will and activism of young people who are willing to sacrifice. I mean, we have hundreds of students at Columbia who have suffered immeasurable suffering, expelled, suspended, records, denied their records, denied their graduation, doxxed, harassed on campus, harassed by kangaroo court disciplinary proceedings on campus. Incredibly punitive measures. Didn't stop them. They had a Palestinian cultural night the night before I came down to DC. They're willing to sacrifice it. But it's not just that is the point I'm trying to make. That's part of the mix. The other part of the mix is the kind of work that the Institute does and that many academics are doing. Those of you who are in the academic field can look at the output of academic presses, Stanford, University of Chicago, University of California, and you will see a flood of books on Palestine in the last 10 or 15 or 20 years. I literally cannot keep up. I used to try and read everything that's published on Palestine. I can barely keep up with the history on the periods that I'm most interested in. Barely keep up. I read a lot. I get these books. I can't keep up. There is so much being published. And that's a function of the fact that people have woken up in academia. And that's one reason academia is a target. There are many, many reasons that academia is a target of the right in this country. But one of them is the fact that people have waken up. This is not a woke moment. This is an awakening. And it is due to the work of literally scores, hundreds perhaps, of dedicated scholars. But that is the kind of work that the Institute for Palestine supports. This work is expensive. I don't expect there are a lot of potential donors in this room. But if you know people who would like to support long-term work on Palestine, the Institute for Palestine Studies would be very, very happy to listen to any suggestions you may have. We need all the support we can get because this is a long-term project. This is not, change is not going to come in 2026 or 2027 or 2028. It will require much, much more of the kind of work that the Institute has been doing over 100 years. Sorry, over 60 years, so 100 years. Book. Magic number. Yeah. I hope it won't take 100 years. So I want to welcome you on behalf of the Institute. Jihad has already welcomed you. FIDA has already welcomed you. But I want to welcome you on behalf of the Institute. I want to apologize for this misprint that said I was going to give a keynote. I gave a keynote last night.
This was a good keynote.
I gave the Karima Khoury distinguished lecture last night at the center upstairs down. I'm somewhere in this huge building, which I believe will be available within a day or two. So if you want to see the keynote that you thought you were going to get, go onto the CCAS website, probably by tomorrow or Monday. And you'll be able to hear me speak about other things in the Institute for Palestine Studies. Again, I welcome you. Thank you all for being here. And I hope you enjoy the panel of really distinguished people that the Institute is going to be presenting today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Khalidi, for your insightful and grounding remarks. We now turn to our first panel of the day, Palestine in a Changing World. This session will explore how regional and international shifts are reshaping the landscape in which the Palestinian struggle unfolds, from diplomacy to Israel's ever-growing aggression in the region, from Palestine to Syria to Lebanon to Iran to Yemen, and to the failures of the past frameworks like Oslo. To moderate this session and lead it, I'm pleased to welcome Mimi Kirk. Mimi Kirk is Associate Director of the Center for Contemporary Arab Studies here at Georgetown. She is also a writer, editor, and former Managing Director of Al-Shabaka, the Palestinian Policy Network. Mimi, the floor is all yours.
Thanks so much, Chad. And thank you all so much for joining us today. And yeah, thank you for that introduction. As you know, I'm Mimi, Associate Director here at the Center. And I'm really honored to be moderating this session on Palestine in a Changing World with four really brilliant scholars. We have Sarah Leah Whitson, Nader Hashemi, Bassam Haddad, and Khalid El-Gindi. So just very briefly, I'm going to read Georgetown's speech and expression policy, and then I want to introduce our speakers. They will then have about 10-15 minutes each to speak, and then I'll pose a question or two, and then we can open it up to the audience for questions. So first, the speech and expression policy. Okay. Georgetown University is committed to standards promoting speech and expression that foster the maximum exchange of ideas and opinions. While it is recognized that audience members may not share the same views as the speaker, it is expected that everyone in attendance at this event will respect the right of the speaker and the Institute for Palestine Studies to share their perspectives and ideas and not cause a disruption to the event's activities. At the end of the event, there will be a question and answer session during which you may ask questions. Please be sure to phrase your comments in the form of a question. In the interest of time, we ask that each person be concise and ask only one question. Thank you. Okay. So let me, I'm going to introduce all the speakers and then, whenever you would like to come up to the table, please do so. First, I will introduce Sarah Leah Whitson. She is Executive Director of DAWN, an organization that seeks to support democracy and human rights in the Middle East, hold abusers accountable, and reform U.S. policy in the region. Previously, she served as Executive Director of Human Rights Watch's Middle East and North Africa Division from 2004 to 2020, overseeing the work of the division in 19 countries. Whitson has led dozens of advocacy and investigative missions, published widely in international media, and frequently appears on global news outlets. Her forthcoming book with Michael Ulmer-Mann, From Apartheid to Democracy, will be published in October 2025. Or I guess very soon. Yeah, this month. I was going to say that's now. That's it. Okay. She is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and serves on multiple boards focused on rights and justice. We're really honored to have you. Okay. Yeah, and it's up to the speakers. Oh, I see Khalid. Okay, and I saw Bassam earlier, so please come up as you like. And I think I'm just going to introduce everyone and then maybe we go in that order, but it's up if you would like to go in a different order, let me know. So Nader Hashemi is the director of the Al-Walid Center, as mentioned, for Muslim Christian Understanding and an associate professor of Middle East and Islamic politics at the Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Service at Georgetown here. He previously served as director of the Center for Middle East Studies at the University of Denver. His research interests include authoritarianism, religion and democracy, Middle East politics, and Islam-West relations. He's author of Islam, Secularism, and Liberal Democracy, and co-editor of the Syria Dilemma and Sectarianization, Mapping the New Politics for the Middle East. Can move over a little longer. Haddad, associate professor at the Shar School of Policy and Government at George Mason University. He's the author of Business Networks in Syria and co-editor of The Critical Political Economy of the Middle East. Haddad is co-founder, editor of Jadaliyya and executive director of the Arab Studies Institute. He's also founding editor of the Arab Studies Journal and producer of multiple acclaimed documentaries.
It's just to make sure it's Shar school, not the Bashar school.
Thank you. Glad to have that cleared up. Thank you. Let's see. He serves on the board of the Arab Council for the Social Sciences and directs the Middle East Studies Pedagogy Initiative. And finally, last but not least, Khaled El-Gindi is a former senior fellow and director of the Middle East Institute's program on Palestine and Israeli-Palestinian affairs. He previously served as an advisor to the Palestinian leadership during final status negotiations and was a key participant in the Annapolis process. He's the author of Blind Spot, America and the Palestinians, From Balfour to Trump. El-Gindi has also served in various U.S. policy roles and holds degrees from Georgetown University and Indiana University. So as I said, we have, we're so honored to have these really brilliant scholars and analysts. I think two of which are alumni of the Master of Arts and Arab Studies program. So good to have alumni with us as well. So let's see, Sarah Leah, do you want to go ahead first? And I know we need to get your PowerPoint set up.
Here or there, I can happy to
It's
just
up
there.
to you. If you want to do it from
Yeah.
there, that's fine. Yeah. So if you are able to share your screen through Zoom, or actually,
I'm not logged in.
you're not logged in. Okay. So easiest thing is,
For me to use yours.
yeah, do you want to just send it
Sure.
to me?
I did, I signed.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Send it to my Georgetown.
Sent it to whatever. It said it wasn't sure if it went through, but.
I tell you what, why don't we, should we start with Bassam and I will figure this out with you while you got, is that okay? Or one of you can go first while we get the PowerPoint?
Please, I can go first. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Jihad, for the invitation. It's an honor for me to be on this panel. I was supposed to talk about Iran, but given what's happened over the last few days with respect to Trump's plan for Gaza, I want to focus my remarks on a critique of Trump's 20-point plan. And I'm happy to talk about Iran during the question and answer session. If anyone wants to ask me about it, I'm happy to say a few words about where Iran fits into this broad picture. So looking at Trump's 20-point plan, what struck me when I first read it were several things. Some that have been, discussed and critiqued, some that have not. The Trump plan, I think, objectively speaking, from the perspective of international law, human rights, and democracy, if you judge the Trump plan from that perspective, it should accurately be called a genocide extortion plan. This was made clear right from the outset when Trump announced the plan, with Netanyahu standing beside him on September the 29th. If Hamas didn't surrender to US and Israeli demands, the genocide would continue, Trump emphatically stated, and would be expanded. And Trump was quite explicit on this topic, and I'm not exaggerating. So on the day when the plan was announced, Trump turned to Bibi and said that if Hamas rejects the plan, Bibi, you got to do what you have to do to finish the job. Then a few days later on Truth Social, he emphatically reaffirmed this point that Hamas had to move fast to accept Trump's plan, or, quote, massive bloodshed would follow. And so effectively the Palestinians were forced to negotiate the terms of ending a genocide against them. And I'm not sure in the history of genocidal sort of warfare whether there's a precedent for this, whether there's even a precedent for this in terms of US foreign policy. It's unique, it's distinct, and I think it's the first thing that jumped out at me when I was looking at the plan. The other aspect of the plan that sort of should be self-evident is that there's no, of course, Palestinian participation or input. Not even the Palestine Authority, what I refer to as, the Palestinian collaborators in Ramallah were consulted or even part of the equation. There was a really good report in the Financial Times that talked about the origins of the Trump's 20-point plan. If you read that article in the Financial Times, it clearly states that the key architects of the plan were Witkoff, Kushner, and Rubio, along with close consultation from several Arab dictatorships, the UAE, Saudi, and Qatar. Quoting from the Financial Times article, the article says it was mostly, quote, mostly Witkoff. He deals with the leaders. Jared dealt with the details. In other words, Jared was the one who had his focus on exactly what the plan was, and Witkoff was effectively the errand boy. The Financial Times reports that Trump's plan overall overlaps with an earlier plan that Tony Blair had suggested for post-war Gaza. Over a year ago, during the Biden era, Blair came up with the idea of an international trusteeship for Gaza, which he hopes to lead. And then the other aspect of the plan, which has already been commented on extensively, is the plan reads like another British mandate over Palestine, which possibly could be extended to the West Bank. 103 years after the last British mandate, here we are again. In fact, it's more accurately described as an American Anglo mandate. Recall the key features of the first British mandate. It was rooted in the idea that the natives are not prepared for self-government or independence. They had to be educated, they had to be trained into the proper norms of modern governance. And then possibly down the road, there would be independence. Today, that new term is repackaged, and it's in the agreement, a new political horizon could possibly manifest itself for a Palestinian state at some unspecified time in the future. And of course, Israel and its Western allies would have veto power and control over the timeline. This is very much a bipartisan US consensus with respect to the question of Palestinian self-determination. I recall last year seeing an interview with Biden's United Nations ambassador, Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield, where she was effectively articulating, this view that, look, the Palestinians are just not ready or prepared yet for independence. We can't just sort of give it over to them. So this is not just about Trump, by the way. This is very much bipartisan American foreign policy. The next thing that strikes me when I read the Trump so-called peace plan was that it has echoes. It reads and it sounds very much like the 1993 Oslo Accords. Limited self-rule, some autonomy, and a promise for something better. Road, the Palestinians can control health, maybe sanitation, postal service, etc. But Israel controls the security, the land, the borders, and everything else. And of course, Israel has veto power and will determine when and if the Palestinians get anything more. Oslo, in many ways, we can see now, looking back, was a poison pill. It purported to offer something good and healing, but in the end, it ends up killing you. And so that's something that's pretty clear when you read if you're familiar with the Oslo Accords, you read this document and it sounds eerily familiar. The one part that hasn't received much criticism or scrutiny, and I think it's a big part of this plan, is the role of Arab and Islamic leaders in this particular plan. In fact, it's legitimizing this plan that I've called an extortion plan, a genocide extortion plan. And I want to highlight a few features that jumped out at me. So Arab and Muslim leaders were very early participants in legitimizing and promoting this plan as a great way forward for solving not just Israel, not just Gaza, but Israel, Palestine more broadly. They issued a press release, and you can read it, where they actually praised Donald Trump's moral leadership and sincerity. I'm quoting. By endorsing this plan, they effectively provided moral and political cover to the Trump-Netanyahu plan by singing its praises and by lauding its potential. And so in this way, Trump and the United States can say, look, we're not enforcing anything on the region. This is actually has broad consensus. And Trump keeps actually repeating this point. The world is behind this plan, including Arab and Muslim states. Over the last week, if you followed what was happening, maximum pressure was put by these Arab and Muslim leaders, not on Israel, but on Hamas to accept the plan. Now, Arab and Muslim leaders have a hell of a lot of leverage that they could have used during this genocide to change the equation. If you ask me about this during the Q&A session, I'll tell you what could have done and what was done in the past, but wasn't done during this genocide. The key countries in question that are part of this plan that met with Trump at the United Nations and I think need to be singled out and identified: Jordan, Indonesia, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Qatar, and Turkey. The other part of the plan that, again, is most actually problematic that no one has really commented on is this whole role of an international stabilization force. The international stabilization force is going to be a force of Arab and Muslim states that will go in, deploy troops to Gaza under the direction of American generals to effectively do what Israel was unable to do, and that is to disarm Hamas, clear the area for the implementation of this plan. And actually, if you think about it, it actually highlights a deep complicity in this genocide extortion plan by Arab and Islamic leaders. They're going to send their troops into the Gaza Strip to sort of, do the dirty work that Israel was unable to do. And then the last part of the plan that speaks to what I would call the complicity of Arab and Muslim leaders, and you can see this is their input in the plan. There's a section at the end of the document on Trump's 20-point plan where he talks about this call for interfaith dialogue. We're going to promote interfaith dialogue. This is the language of the Abraham Accords. That the problem here is that if only Arabs and Muslims and Jews can get together, we can sort of promote this sort of solidarity between different faith traditions. And of course, if you follow what's happened under the rubric of interfaith dialogue in the context of the Abraham Accords, it's a complete and total sham. There's all these meetings that take place at the Simon Wiesenthal Center, where a country like Bahrain will send their religious leaders over, and they'll have this nice discussion about how we all have a shared common sort of religious faith and identity and values. But of course, it's completely divorced from what's happening on the ground. It's an attempt to effectively whitewash occupation, whitewash authoritarianism, whitewash the terrible human rights records of these authoritarian regimes in the Arab and Islamic world. It effectively is meant to legitimize this entire process by couching it in the language of interfaith dialogue. And then the last point that I want to mention, two last points very quickly that I think hasn't been sufficiently talked about. The Trump's plan talks about this idea where, look, no Palestinian will be expelled. They can leave if they want. They can stay if they want. If they leave, they can come back. Because that's a complete distortion of what's happening. Because if you know anything about what's happened in Gaza over the last 2 years, Gaza effectively no longer exists. It's been turned into a parking lot. Just take a look at some of the images, the aerial photographs. It cannot sustain life. According to the United Nations, they said in the best case scenario, it would take 15 years just to clear the rubble. Okay, forget about building anything on top of it. And so most likely, if this plan, let's say, goes forward, most Gazans will, I think, given the choice of staying in these conditions, will likely leave. Even if Israel is able to sort of remove, half of the population, they can say, look, we didn't expel them. Voluntary migration is the term. They left on their own. We don't bear any moral responsibility. Of course, they chose to leave. And of course they would choose to leave, given what's happened in Gaza. I don't know what the exact figure is. 7 Hiroshima bombs. I've heard 13 Hiroshima bombs dropped on one of the most densely populated places in the world. There's no chance for Palestinian life to sustain itself, at least in the short term, given these conditions. And of course, what's so insidious about this Trump plan is it actually, allows Israel to accomplish its goal of depopulation without having to bear any of the moral responsibility, which was what the previous plan was that Trump announced in February. The last point that I want to make before wrapping up is, and this is hasn't been talked about, but it's central to Trump's plan. There's no reference to international law or particularly to the question of human rights and accountability. Gaza now is a massive war crimes site. What needs to happen normatively, it needs to be protected. We need to have human rights, not war crimes investigators, forensic experts to go there to protect these sites, to discover exactly what was happened, what ordinance exists, how many bodies are still buried in the rubble. None of this, of course, is in the plan. It's completely absent. In fact, what's built into the plan is there's going to be no accountability over these war crimes and crimes against humanity, injustice, and genocide. None of this is part of the deal. And that makes sense, right? Because the people who wrote the plan, Kushner, the United States, and the Israelis, they're morally responsible. They don't want accountability. But why didn't the Arab and Muslim states insist on this, right? They claim to support Palestinian human rights. If you think about it, it's not difficult to understand. the idea of accountability for human rights violations is an anathema to any authoritarian regime. They don't want to have that as part of the international rules and norms of our international system because they have their own human rights problems. You don't want to establish a principle that if you're guilty of human rights violations, you will be held accountable. So of course they didn't insist upon it. But I think it's one of the glaring and sort of really shocking things about this plan that hasn't received the attention that it deserves. So let me just conclude by saying something about what's happened in Gaza, what this plan means with the with the core theme of this conference, and that is the theme of history and critical junctures in history. When you sort of look at what's happening right now in Gaza, clearly, this genocide is a historic juncture. It's a turning point. It's a second Nakba, much worse in many ways, arguably, than the first one. And I'm reminded of my reaction when I started reading Rashid Khaledi's book, The 100 Years War on Palestine. It struck me that as I got into the second chapter, the key sort of features and factors that shaped the destiny of the Palestinians were in place and were shaping this particular conflict and the plight of the Palestinians prior to 1948. And these three factors are still in play, and they're still responsible for this moment that we're in right now. What are the three factors that were there? The role of international great powers. It was British then, now it's the Americans. That's still there. The role of Arab states, not really caring about what's happening to the Palestinians, pursuing their own narrow interests. And then finally, and this came out in and Rashid Khaledi's book, the role of the failure of Palestinian leadership. Now, the first two themes are very difficult for any of us to change, but the theme of Palestinian leadership here is something that I think is one of the biggest missing gaps and is really sort of in need of further study, another conference by the Institute for Palestine Studies. Because if you think and know anything about or study the whole question of national liberation struggle, what strikes you is when you look at the question of Palestine is the colossal failure of effective national liberation leadership and a strategy. It existed at one time, but after Oslo, it withered away. In the last 10 years of his life, Edward Said repeatedly focused on this particular problem. And last night in his keynote lecture, I was really happy to see that Professor Khaledi talked about this question of the need for a unified national leadership and a strategy. Without that, I don't think we can get out of this particular dilemma of constant Palestinian pulverization, dehumanization, and degradation that we see embodied in this particular document and that we see sort of categorizing the plight of the Palestinians right now. How different this conflict might be if we had a Palestinian leadership that was credible, that was incorruptible, and that was representative, not just of the Palestinians in the occupied territories, but the entire Palestinian community, a strategy that replicated something similar to the African National Congress. I think we would be in a much better place. And the challenge really is trying to figure out why that hasn't happened now. And so the question that I wanted to pose to Professor Khaledi last night is, if a genocide like this is not going to be a catalyst for creating a new national leadership, I don't know what will be. I think it's the most important aspect of the future of Palestinian rights and Palestinian national rights that really deserves much more study and focus. I'll end it there. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Dr. Hashemi, and thanks everyone for bearing with us with the technology. I think we're all set now with Sarah Leah Whitson's presentation. So let me share that. Okay. May have to click in it to get it going. Let's see. So are you able to? Yes. Okay, there we go. Great.
Hi, everyone. I'm actually going to do a little something unconventional in my remarks today, and I'm sure I'm not going to get through this PowerPoint, but I'm going to give it a god-awful good try. It's a little unconventional because I'm going to ask you to suspend your skepticism and allow your mind to imagine something different. And that something different is what my colleague and I, Michael Omerman, have attempted to do in presenting the blueprint, which is a new vision for Israel-Palestine. The blueprint is a new approach to address the Israel-Palestine conflict, breaking with the failed Oslo process. We have never been more in need of new ideas. Ideas not just about what should be, but what actually can be done and how we can get there. We hope that the genocide has jolted the international community out of its slumber, but what's still missing is a credible, actionable plan for what comes next. Because we, of course, know that Trump's ceasefire plan is not a plan for what comes next. It's a short-term ceasefire that will maintain a holding pattern for occupation and apartheid. In presenting this new idea and a new vision and a new blueprint, we start with a recognition that there is currently in Israel-Palestine a one-state reality. Numerous authors have published books about this. Most recently, we have Rob Malley and Hussein Aha's book explaining, sort of putting in the final nails in the coffin of the Oslo process. We understand that the reality is an apartheid one-state reality. We also know that the occupation is illegal. We know that the one-state regime currently in place is an apartheid regime. And of course, the Gaza remains occupied, ceasefire or not. We set out to present the blueprint as a radical new vision to step in the wake of the failed Oslo process, a failed Oslo process that has been perfectly convenient for Israel and its supporters to just keep talking about the two-state solution, the two-state process, knowing that it's dead and won't go anywhere. The blueprint that we present is radical in two critical respects. First of all, it prioritizes ending Israeli occupation and apartheid ahead of issues of statehood and governance. The traditional approaches to peace and conflict resolution, not just in Israel-Palestine, but writ large, have always prioritized issues of governance ahead of issues of crimes. And we think that order has failed the people of Palestine in particular. The blueprint, and this is the part where I ask you to suspend your skepticism and try to imagine a different future from the man-made catastrophe, not a law of nature that we face today, establishes a 3-year transitional government between the river and the sea that aims to create the conditions for democratic decision-making based on principles of equality, democracy, and human rights. In another radical way, the blueprint relies exclusively on democratic decision-making, not unelected, unaccountable, so-called representatives of the Palestinian people or the criminal Israeli government to make decisions on behalf of the individual human beings who live between the river and the sea. And so the blueprint and the transitional government culminates in a referendum that allows the people living there to democratically determine their future governance in 1, 2, or more states, binational, confederation, and so forth. There are a lot of people who have excellent ideas of what they want the future of Israel-Palestine to look like. There's the one-state movement. There is the land for all movement. There are still those committed to the two states. And we don't take a position on what that final issue of governance, frankly, the secondary issue of governance should be, because we believe that that decision, that determination should not be made absent a democratic process that includes a representation, equitable and just representation of all of the people who live between the river and the sea. In coming up with the blueprint, we didn't really set out to create the blueprint. We set out to understand what blueprints others had for those who want the one state, for those who want the two state, for various movements and groups in Israel-Palestine. And what we discovered was that no one had a plan. No one had a vision of how to get there, how to get to the ultimate configuration that they wanted to see. And so we set out interviewing over 100 stakeholders, primarily in Israel and Palestine, academics, but also people who are expert in peace and conflict resolution around the world. We studied carefully the transitions to democracy or political transitions in a number of other countries, South Africa being an important one, of course, but also Northern Ireland, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Yemen, and some other cases. And we talked to people who are involved in the peace building and transitions in those places to understand what worked and what didn't work, and how we could do something different. And yes, this is a University of California publication that was peer-reviewed. So thank you, University of California, for squeezing us in. Very briefly, because this is the hard part, where I'm always afraid that I'm going to lose my audience. I want to spend a little time telling you what the blueprint is. To give you a flavor of the amount of detail, thought, and care we have put into coming up with a transition plan that we believe can actually work. It starts with a caretaker government that transfers the powers of the state of Israel and Palestine to it. It relies on a consociational model with representation quotas of Jews, Palestinians, and smaller minorities. It transforms and merges existing ministries in Israel and the Palestinian Authority, and it entails a process of lustration to remove the worst offenders from participation in the political process. The task of the caretaker government is very narrow and limited. It is to end military rule and apartheid laws throughout Israel and Palestine. It is to restore freedom of movement across Israel and Palestine while maintaining checkpoints that are applied on a non-discriminatory basis in order to preserve the necessary security for this process to unfold. It involves the creation of a high court for the transition with the adoption of a new basic law for the judiciary and consociational membership for the High Court, but retains the 24 court systems that already exist between Israel and Palestine to continue operating on a variety of laws, some that are merged, some that are applied across the board, maintaining a local municipal rule on matters that already are subject of local and municipal rule. Critically, it grants equal citizenship for all. The settlers can remain where they are during the transition. It involves inclusive state systems. We integrate the police, security, and intelligence forces, as has happened in other countries where governments have changed, where fragmented states have joined. The unified police, intelligence, and security forces, however, maintain their local spheres of autonomy, their local policing duties, because local policing is always the best policing. There is a new security doctrine, again, based on principles of non-discrimination, equality, and human rights. And we include external security guarantees for the states in the region to reassure them of the non-aggressive position of the transitional state. We undertake a process of disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration that really follows the classic lines of so-called DDR under various UN guidelines and globally adopted guidelines for how such a process of disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration will take place for irregular armed groups that exist, whether they're settler paramilitary forces or Palestinian armed factions. The transitional government includes release of political prisoners, but does not resolve the issues of refugee rights and transitional justice. It leaves those to a democratically elected polity after the referendum, but it does lay the groundwork for recognizing Palestinian refugee rights, allowing Palestinian refugees at imminent risk where they may be, to return immediately to Israel-Palestine and begins structuring the transitional justice process to be adopted after the referendum. The democratic elections that we hope will take place happens after 3 years. But what happens if that vote doesn't take place? Well, if the vote doesn't take place, we will have successfully converted the one apartheid state, the one state reality of apartheid and occupation into a democratic state. That would be the new default. The aim of the blueprint is to fill the missing policy link. The international community has still been unable to articulate positive policy demands or vision on how to end Israeli occupation and apartheid and respect the rights of self-determination and equality for the people living in Israel-Palestine. It's, we believe, been an obstacle to pressing forward on sanctions, on diplomatic isolation, on ending trade relations, on forcing Israel to do what the International Court of Justice has said it must do, and that is to end its occupation, because no one knows what to do next or how to get there. The biggest missing piece, of course, is political will. The starting point for the blueprint is the Israeli public's consent to a transitional government under the weight of what we see of international and domestic pressure. The Palestinian public as well must consent to this, but we know that the power resides with Israelis. We hope to provide an off-ramp for the Israeli people to rejoin the international community, to end their ostracism and exclusion from the civilized world. But right now there is no off-ramp, and we are trying to create that off-ramp that will allow Israelis to understand that there is an option for democracy and equality and freedom that respects their security and their identity as well. We hope that the blueprint will persuade policymakers that there is indeed a positive alternative to the failed Oslo process. And we think that the blueprint can be that. But we also very humbly are really just seeking to invigorate debate and discussion of what a new future for Israel-Palestine can look like, and allow us to break free from the shackles of the corpse of the Oslo process to begin envisioning a new pathway to justice and equality. So that's it in a nutshell. I hope I haven't gotten over my allotted time. And I will pause there.
Thank you so much. All right. Yeah, please. Yeah. As we
حتى يشوفوني so they can see.
Okay.
Um, I just landed from overseas, so yeah. Thank you all for being here and for our guests and speakers. I was looking forward to the comments on Iran, but I guess we can address this in the Q&A. My title is actually on Israel, Syria, and Lebanon, but it will also include the United States and the broader picture. We have all, and I will speak a little fast so I can cover the material. We have all witnessed and continue witness unyielding aggression against Lebanon and Syria, not least after the ceasefire that Israel and Hezbollah agreed to in November 2024 under American stewardship. Today, undeterred regionally or locally, Israel occupies a significant portion of Lebanese land along the border of the two states, with daily incursions, airstrikes, drone invasions, and other violations that have claimed more than 300 Palestinian and Lebanese lives, and untold destruction of homes, establishments, and entire neighborhoods, and sometimes villages. Ecstatic about the prospect of disarming Hezbollah, Israel joins the Lebanese cabinet and a significant portion of the Lebanese polity in looking forward to that day. It is said that the Lebanese army will henceforth guarantee Lebanon's sovereignty under the auspices of the United States and its junior regional partners, including Saudi Arabia and Israel. The United States will therefore guarantee Lebanese sovereignty, just like it guaranteed its other ally, Qatari sovereignty, when Israel bombed Doha. Similarly, Israel occupies Syrian land along its border, curling up to the Lebanese southeast border and adjacent hills and mountains, placing Israeli forces within a few miles from the greater Damascus and other Syrian cities and towns. Israel incessantly violates Syria's airspace with occasional incursions deep into Syrian territory for one excuse after another, the last of which was to protect the Druze community in Sweda, where it launched limited strikes into the heart of Damascus as well. Significantly, the most egregious and heinous aggression was Israel's full-scale brutal violation of Israel's sovereignty 2 days after the collapse of the Syrian regime on December 8, 2024, where Israel's air force and missiles took out approximately 80% of Syria's military capabilities and army and bases throughout Syrian territory not occupied or controlled by Turkey or the United States. It was a series of deliberate strikes intended to completely strip Syria of any significant defensive or offensive power for a long time to come. The move did not cause as much as a peep from the international community, and certainly not from the states that must have been in the know, including the United States, Turkey, Qatar, and Russia. The current Syrian regime's response came a couple of days late. It was very timid and appealed to international law. No follower of the region and Syria was shocked. Naturally, we must view Israel's aggression towards Lebanon and Syria in the broader regional context. As Israel proceeds with its genocidal policy of eliminating both lives and the foundation of life in Gaza, it has waged wars on and or bombed 7 neighboring countries and beyond, including Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, Iran, Iraq, Tunisia, Qatar. No starting point can evade the principal partner in Israel's genocide, that is the United States in the first degree, but also various European countries, including the UK, Germany, and France. Since October 7th, the US has given Israel $31 billion, provided unwavering political and diplomatic support, and the kind of impunity that emboldened Israel to obliterate Gaza and, indeed, obliterate its own narratives of victimhood, democracy, and of being a safe haven. Though it is still a safe haven, by the way, for sex offenders, as we have witnessed of late. For our own purposes here and now, given we are sitting only 2.3 miles from the White House, it is important not to jettison that while we are observing this current administration underlie a horrific phase of genocide, this path was paved brutally and perhaps even more ideologically by the previous administration. Similarly, pinning the horror in Gaza and beyond on Netanyahu, the Likud, or the current unprecedented far-right government in Israel is to ignore the political, institutional, ideological, and historical foundations of the state of Israel, which made this epitome of horror possible. The Nakba is simply deepening under the weight of international complicity, which is a key intractable obstacle to Palestine and Palestinian liberation. In my quick, brief comments, I will proceed from Israel's evolving regional strategy of establishing what I will call or describe total security. A couple of words about that with Lebanon and Syria as starting points. Israel has sought after October 7th to establish total security through a zero-sum game with the Palestinians and Arab neighbors near and far. The next and so far last piece of the total security puzzle is Iran, which Israel struck last spring without being provoked and is said to be preparing another imminent strike in the coming weeks or months, and I'm hoping we can address this in the conversation after. Israel's goal is to establish total security not by being ready and capable to defend itself, but by completely eliminating threats to its domination by bombing its enemies into total impotence. The formula, therefore, on display is the following. Israel's total security requires total impotence of its adversaries and potential adversaries. From Israel's perspective, they're just getting started. It is arguable that Israel is emboldened in good measure by its successful attempts at degrading the axis of resistance during the fall of 2024, when it eliminated the upper leadership of Hezbollah and bombed parts of the Dahi in Beirut to smithereens, as well as devastating South Lebanon. This has had three effects. These hits subdued Hezbollah for the meantime, Israel's most immediate and active deterrence, which has lasted some 18 years since Israel was sent out of Lebanon, running by Hezbollah's ground fighting force, aided by the far less rocket power at that time in the summer of 2006. Second, it had the effect of isolating Iran, also temporarily, to a significant degree, as it also reduced the compound impact of the Houthis, leaving itself as the sole obstacle to Israel's regional domination. Taking out Hezbollah paved the way for the still unconfirmed but reasonably discoverable regional and international machinations that took out the Syrian regime, which by then was decrepit and almost useless to any notion of resistance. It is notable that after 2019 and 20, the Syrian regime seems to have shifted its strategy quietly away from the axis and towards rapprochement with Saudi Arabia and the UAE, which did not sit well with both Iran and Hezbollah, but neither was it a shock if you are paying attention. And we can talk about this further in the Q&A, because Syria, or the Syrian regime under that leadership, completely disinvested from itself as well, from its armed forces and its polity and its economy and what have you. Certainly, and that's fourth, certainly after October 2023, Syria's role in the resistance axis had declined considerably, even if it always was one of a passive enabler and bridge between Iran and Hezbollah. I am happy to talk about this further because there's a lot to address here in the conversation or discussion or Q&A, including why the collapse. I'm also happy to talk about why the collapse of the Syrian regime is measured not by the absence of a real and direct threat, because the Syrian regime, the prior one, was not in and of itself a threat to Israel, but it should be measured by the potential of an alternative complacent successor that comforts Israel by and large, which is potentially what we are witnessing today. Today's configuration is a rare moment for Israel. It's a rare opportunity. However, it is not all bad, and I will address this as I close. Once Israel was able to realize these limited regional objectives vis-a-vis Hezbollah and Syria, its appetite to burn stages and go full force after the remaining albatross enemy, Iran, was insatiable and urgent. Here's why. Israel's genocide proceeded without any limitations from, here's why Israel is emboldened. Israel's genocide proceeded without any limitations from the international community or its own domestic balance of power. That rare combination, thanks to the 82% support among Jewish citizens of Israel, was and still is viewed as a window of opportunity, primarily because of the United States' unconditional power or compliance, however you look at it. In other words, whereas Israel never cared about international law and had always dehumanized Palestinians and its other enemies, its military superiority today is being weaponized to sweep it all up. The comment, in the words of the immortal war criminal Donald Rumsfeld, who took the 9/11 attacks as an opportunity to eliminate and degrade all enemies of the United States, according to the establishment at that time, whether they were involved or not involved in the 9/11 attacks. Second, moreover, despite its military superiority and savage destruction of lives and life more broadly, one can reasonably say that Israel has indeed been thrown somewhat off balance on multiple fronts, not least by the attacks of October 7th, as well as the latent internal political, economic, and I argue existential reckoning that will increasingly animate its polity, not just government, once the dust begins to settle. And it has not been settling. We've been saying this for months and months and months and months. Even if not, the veil has been removed. Israel's narratives have gone increasingly bankrupt abroad, not least among the citizens of its guarantor state here, America. According to polls polls which show Israel's consistently declining support, including among American Jewry as well as Republicans, and what was once called liberal Zionists. Even if somewhat reversible among some, it can still be asserted that Israel may have forever lost the majority of Americans, including the new generations who repudiated Israel's actions long before the recent deluge of criticism of Israel, which increased exponentially in March 2025 when Israel violated the ceasefire. And when people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Tucker Carlson and many others began to pay attention to the polls. So after all, we live in a market world. One can even note an inverse relationship between its exercise of naked power and declining moral and or soft power. Its once hegemonic Israel's once hegemonic narratives have given way to multiple and recurring shocks at the live-streamed genocide it has been conducting for 2 years. Thus, Israel has been ramping up to extend its efforts at dehumanizing Palestinians and its other adversaries to the realm of cyberspace and social media, where it perceives the battle will in part take place in the last phase of this genocide, of this intense genocide, because it could continue on slow motion as it was prior. Already, reporters are uncovering campaigns in the United States and beyond that reveal the lowest points of Zionist ideas and appeal. This is marked by the fact that Israel now has to purchase consent and support, post by post, as you may have heard. Worse, actually, as it has to purchase its existing supporters' support, as we have seen in politics in the United States and now in social media. If you're paying attention, that realm is actually very interesting. A lot of people discount it, but it's very interesting in terms of the masses of influencers and shows that are outside the mainstream. That realm is actually huge, and it occupies sometimes a larger share of audiences compared to the corporate media. The downward spiral is occurring just as the bar for supporting Israel is rising. I've never seen this since 1984 when I came to this country. When you can't appeal to the heart, you go for the mind, and then, of course, the pocket. Moreover, a related strategy that is now in overdrive is that Israel is hard at work to elevate various forms of technological monitoring and surveillance methods intended to identify, deter, and or paralyze critics going forward, whether they be state or non-state actors, institutions, or individuals. Note that the horrifically repulsive pagers attack in Lebanon, claiming thousands of lives and limbs, had its starting point almost a decade prior to 2024. The next target is not only a military one, but the social realm as a whole. It reflects the highest point in Israel's military superiority and the lowest point in its legitimacy as a government and potentially state. Hence, total security is not a strategy, but an existential necessity for Israel. And we are all here, the world over, to witness and stand up to its continued savagery. Many have reasonably written off the Syrian arena as a potential obstacle to Israel's aggression in the short run, given the ongoing talks of a security agreement and perhaps more with the current Syrian regime. But Lebanon is not yet written off. In the coming months, we will observe how local, regional, and international factors might align to completely neutralize Lebanon as a deterrent, let alone threat. The potential Israel war on Iran and its outcome might be paramount in this regard. Again, and as I keep saying, in all cases, we are here to stay. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy, and of course, my fellow panelists. Thank you to the Institute for Palestine Studies. Professor Kennedy is a mentor, is a humble student of his, and I always tell people, my students, if your bibliography does not include something from the Journal of Palestine Studies, then it's absolutely not complete. So So I'm thrilled to be here. So I'm going to talk about the sort of broader regional implications of the Gaza genocide with the focus on the role of Arab states in particular. But first, I want to talk a little bit about this new ceasefire deal. I want to set aside some of the broader components of the plan, the peace board, and these sort of, neo-colonial dimensions of it. And I'm not entirely convinced that we're going to see those materialize in the way that they're envisioned in the text. We've seen many texts come and go. And I don't think there's anything in these concepts that is immutable or sacred. But rather, I think actors on the ground can shape events differently if they choose to exercise their agency. But on the specific terms of this first phase, which isn't fundamentally different than what has been discussed over most of the last 2 years, an end to the hostilities, hostage prisoner exchange, a surge in aid, and so forth. Well, we all remember what happened after the last ceasefire in January, which Israel decided to unilaterally demolish, and that could very well happen again. There's no, I think that's a very reasonable concern that people have once hostages are released. But I would say the chances this time are maybe slightly better for a couple of things. So what's different about this particular ceasefire over the one that we saw earlier this year? One thing that's different, I think, is that changed the trajectory of events was the attack on Qatar, right? The Israeli strike on Doha, which was so audacious, even for Israel, that it really it shocked the region after 2 years of really shocking stuff. This is the thing that really, I think, shocked the region, particularly for U.S. allies, that that one of America's closest allies in the Gulf could be targeted in this way, in such a reckless way, was clearly a sign of overreach. And I think this is where we then saw Washington begin to try to rein Israel in. What is also different about this new deal is we've seen much greater regional involvement, in particular Arab states, but also others. And I think in large part because of, the first point, the region was sort of shocked into, especially, if you look at the mediators, the Egyptians and Qataris, of course, had been playing a role for a while. They were now joined also by the Turks. These are all three major U.S. allies in the region who I think were very alarmed by the Doha bombing. There was a lot of talk about, Israel could do the very same thing, bomb negotiators in Cairo or Hamas folks in Istanbul or wherever. And so I think there was a lot of pressure put on the Trump administration to rein things in. And that's one of the reasons we saw something we'd never thought we'd see, which is an apology by Netanyahu to the Qataris. You could also argue maybe a third factor was the mass mobilizations in the West. If you've watched the events in Italy, really millions of people brought the country to a standstill. The massive protests in the UK, in even places like Amsterdam. Of course, Arab publics are no less enraged by the genocide, but they don't have the same freedom to mobilize in those same ways. So the question that I wanted to tackle today was why the region, and especially Arab states, were so passive to begin with for most of the last 2 years throughout this genocide. And I'm going to identify 5 overlapping and mutually reinforcing trends in no particular order. The first is that Arab states had begun a process of divesting from Palestine over the last 15 or so years. The regional upheavals since 2010 and 11, the uprisings obviously shifted Arab priorities, saw Arab states being much more consumed with internal turmoil. We saw many regimes collapse, civil wars. You all know those stories. New power brokers emerged with countries like Egypt and Syria and Iraq out of the picture. The Gulf states became the region's new power brokers. And that had been, that's a process that had been in play for a while, but it really came to fruition, I think, with the Arab Spring, or what we used to call the Arab Spring. Right around 2013 is when we see, as part of these new power brokers, their focus is on regional stability and countering, the effects of the Arab Spring. So they look at the region through the dual threat of, one, the spread of democracy, and two, the rise of Islamists, and especially the Muslim Brotherhood and its various affiliates. Obviously, Hamas is one of those affiliates. In 2013 is when we see Arab states begin downgrading, literally divesting from the Palestinian issue, withholding funds from the Palestinian Authority. I think in that period, the PA lost between 50 and 80% of its Gulf funding. This is also when we see the Abraham Accords in 2020, which was itself a sign that Arab states had moved on from the Palestinian issue, and that they were no longer willing to subordinate their bilateral interests or their regional interests to this unicorn of a Palestinian state. And so they literally began divesting financially from the PA. The second, I think, major force is resurgent authoritarianism, overemphasizing Palestinian liberation is very risky business for Arab regimes that rely on repression and many of the same kinds of things that Israel's occupation is known for. And so solidarity with Palestinians becomes tricky, especially in light of the Arab Spring, right? And there's a whole new context in which this is happening. The Arab uprisings, I think, also underscored the organic and some cases direct links, organizational ties between Palestinian liberation and that of the Arab peoples. A lot of the Tahrir Square activists, for example, earned their stripes and got their experience in mobilizing for Palestine, particularly after in the context of the Second Intifada. The regimes have internalized this lesson. So whereas in the past, pro-Palestinian protests were seen as an acceptable and sometimes useful pressure release valve, after the Arab uprisings, Palestinian solidarity itself was seen as a threat to regimes. So today, we've seen activists in Europe and the United States and across the Western world risk arrest, the loss of jobs, the loss of diplomas, harassment, and at the same time, the streets of Arab capitals have been largely silent. I think this is not due to a lack of interest or apathy. It's really a result, I think, of state repression that is quite extensive. Allowing public expressions of support for Palestinian liberation is an invitation to its own people to demand the same. I think people naturally make those linkages. The third is one that I touched on, also is hostility toward Hamas in particular, and the Muslim Brotherhood more generally. Most of these regimes are caught in a kind of zero-sum logic. Anything that could benefit Hamas is something to be avoided. Obviously, a ceasefire was something that would have benefited Hamas back in the fall of 2023, obviously would have benefited Palestinians also, would have prevented a lot of death and destruction, but they were very lethargic in moving on that. I think in large part because they wanted to see Hamas cut down to size. They wanted to see Hamas degraded, which of course it has been. The fourth factor I would say is dependence on the United States. Both the Biden and Trump administrations had been applying pressure on Arab regimes behind the scenes, not to take any actions that could directly confront Israel's actions. And I think these same Arab regimes comply. It's hard to imagine that the Sisi regime in particular could not have done more to get aid and humanitarian supplies into Gaza. If you listen to the speeches, particularly in Arabic, of Sisi, he sounds quite meek and mild when he talks about Gaza. He says, look, there's nothing we can do. Israel closed the border, and so we have to. He sounds very obedient and meek, which is strange because that's not how he comes across, I think, as an authoritarian, right? You don't want to project that kind of weakness. What was really interesting to me is even during Trump's visit to the Gulf last spring in May, visited Qatar, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia, there was no attempt by Arab states, by even Qatar, to link their many trade and other kinds of strategic deals to events in Gaza, even though we were this was 2 months after Israel had violated the ceasefire and mass starvation was taking place, and Israeli officials were talking about the gates of hell opening up in Gaza. And yet there wasn't even then an attempt to use their leverage with Washington. Now, that calculation by these states, and the Qataris in particular, has changed very dramatically after the Israeli attack in Doha last month. And it's one of the things that have, I think, led to this new deal. And the last, and definitely not least factor, I would describe as the chronic weakness and growing irrelevance of the Palestinian political leadership. That weakness is partly structural and partly self-imposed. Obviously, Palestinians are the weakest actor in the mix. They will always be the weakest actor in any scenario because they are a stateless group of many of whom are refugees. They obviously don't have geopolitical power in the way that their neighbors do. But I think they've never been weaker than under the leadership, and I use that term very, very loosely, of Mahmoud Abbas. In terms of the structural weaknesses, I would also add, we can debate whether it's structural or not, but the Oslo process as a framework has further deepened and actually helped institutionalize Palestinian weakness. Just as a reminder, Oslo, of course, is not just a deal between two parties, between the PLO and Israel, but also radically reshaped internal Palestinian politics, as well as US-Palestinian relations. This is what I call in my book, the Oslo trade-off, which, to summarize, basically consists of 2 points. The first is that the Palestinian leadership agreed to give up a degree of autonomy and independent decision-making over its own internal political and institutional affairs in return for a seat at the negotiating table, and with the expectation that the United States would eventually deliver Israel and, of course, Palestinian state as a result. The second important piece of this is that for the first time ever, really, at least in the history of the PLO, the modern in the history of the modern Palestinian national movement, the United States and Israel had direct access to and a say in, and in some cases, a veto over key aspects of internal Palestinian politics and decision making. This wasn't the case. They did not have access to Palestinian decision making before 1993, right? When the PLO reigned supreme, obviously the Arab states had considerable access, in part because they were also major donors. But now you have the United States and Israel, whose interests clearly do not align with those of the Palestinian people. So that was different. Since the 2007 split between Fatah and Hamas, the PA and its leadership have also been in steady decline. Rampant corruption and ineffective government, etc. If the PA did not prioritize putting its own house in order, then why should Arab states be more Palestinian than the Palestinians, right? So there are, if Palestinians weren't going to invest in their own future, why would we expect Arab states to do that? Both the PA and Fatah on one hand and Hamas on the other are clearly to blame for this disastrous state of affairs. Though I think in the balance of things, I think we have to put more of the blame on Abbas and his leadership, if only because he claims to be the leader of all Palestinians. So he's not just president of the PA, he's also head of the PLO. So it's no wonder that Abbas is hugely unpopular among ordinary Palestinians. Even before October 7th, close to 80% of Palestinians wanted him to resign. I imagine those numbers have only gotten worse for him since then. Abbas's legitimacy and relevance have continued to plummet amid unprecedented Israeli assault on Gaza and the crackdown on the West Bank, which we often forget, all of which highlight his impotence. So where does that leave us going forward? I believe Palestine still resonates deeply with people across the Arab world. I would make a distinction between the stances of Arab regimes and where the Arab publics are. As I said, they are not, the Arab citizens are not less outraged by the atrocities we've seen over the last 2 years than folks in the West. They are probably more so. And I think they will not soon forget the passivity and complicity of their own regimes throughout this genocide. Now, I would just remind people what happened after the Nakba of 1948, the fallout that rippled across the region. We saw one regime after another fall. I'm not suggesting that this is going to happen in this instance. But I'm also not suggesting that it could happen. I mean, if nothing else, I think it's hard to imagine that there won't be some blowback for these regimes on the domestic level, particularly in places like Egypt, which is obviously very, very close to events in Gaza and has that organic connection with everything that's happened there. And the second point is, I think like 1948 and 1967, Palestinians are again learning the lesson that Arab states are not going to save them and that they're going to have to take matters into their own hands. And so there is an urgent need, not just for Palestinian leadership. Yes, of course, that's the goal. But at this moment, there needs to be, what's missing is even Palestinian agency. It's one thing for Israel and the United States to ignore Palestinian agency, but it's something else entirely for Palestinians themselves to not assert their own agency. I think there is a need to focus on reforming, if not remaking, the Palestinian national movement and its institutions with the aim of creating a unitary, credible, and representative leadership, as we've already heard from others. I think this is a prerequisite going forward. You know, the two things that Yasser Arafat's legacy was very complicated. But the two things that I think he was most successful in was in unifying Palestinians on the one hand under this umbrella called the PLO, and the other was affirming independent Palestinian decision making. Both of those have now been lost under the leadership, or at least under the tenure of Mahmoud Abbas, and they desperately need to be regained. And this is not something that Israelis or Americans or Europeans or Arab states have jurisdiction over. This is an internal Palestinian dynamic and process. And you know, the idea, how can we expect Palestinians to exercise self-determination in an independent state if they can't even assert or won't assert sovereignty over their own domestic politics and sort of put their internal house in order? So to be clear, I'm not talking about reforming the PA in the way we hear here in Washington or in Brussels or other capitals, but something much deeper, and that is reinventing and reviving the Palestinian national movement. I think such a revived Palestinian leadership is not going to be enough to shift regional trends, but it's impossible to imagine any real change without it. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all the panelists. And it's just been very rich discussion already, of course. And I have so many questions for each of you. But I will start, I think, with just a few questions based on each of your presentations. And then we'll go to the audience, and also those of you who are watching online. I will monitor the Q&A, so please do feel free to pose questions there, and then I will pose them to our panelists. But maybe I'll start just because, Khalid, I just listened to you thinking about sort of reimagining or rejuvenating the Palestinian national movement. And I think we've talked about this in the past as well, but I'm always curious on thoughts about the PLO and bringing the PLO back in some kind of way. I know that is sometimes something that is talked about as a strategy, and would love to hear your thoughts on that. Is that a way forward, perhaps, or not? Yeah.
I'd actually love to hear Professor Khaledi's ideas on this, but and I should just caveat, I'm not a Palestinian, right? So it's not really my place to tell Palestinians how they should organize their politics, even though I just spent a few minutes doing just that. But I feel like what I presented was sort of stating the obvious in a lot of ways. Exactly how Palestinians go about reforming and reviving their politics, because there really isn't, right? There isn't anything. There are no institutional politics right now happening, or not inside the PA, not inside the PLO. I have felt for a time that the PA probably should be downgraded to a service providing body, and the PLO maybe should be upgraded and revived as the locus of as the central address of Palestinian decision making, the international address for the Palestinians worldwide, as it has been historically. So that's not especially controversial. But exactly how you go about doing that, I think, is a question for Palestinians to answer. And maybe, I mean, look, you either reform existing institutions or you replace them and build new ones. I tend to think it's probably, the path of least resistance is to take something that already exists and fix it if it's broken, and clearly it is, rather than invent something new and then it has to struggle to acquire legitimacy. And there have been attempts to sort of bypass the PLO, and Mahmoud Abbas especially is very jealous about anything that he perceives to be a competition to the PLO. So I think I tend to think reviving the PLO is the best option, but it's up to Palestinians on how to do that. But we can't simply pretend that the PLO exists. It doesn't. And the PLO is a fiction. It's letterhead. It's, Mahmoud Abbas pulls the PLO letterhead out of this drawer when he needs something from the United Nations. And then he's got the State of Palestine / Palestinian Authority in this drawer. And so, but as an institution, it's not functioning. And I think this is the moment that Palestinians can and should do, should start convening and should start putting it together. I think it begins with reconciliation between Hamas and Fatah, but that's just the necessary but insufficient first step.
Want to, and perhaps this is a question for Nader. I know, Nader, you're interested in the Hague group, and I'm thinking just sort of the larger question perhaps is the role, what could be the role or what should be the role of the Global South in advocating for Palestine, outside of, and then we just heard about, of course, how we know that the Gulf states are even though the people are very much working for Palestinian rights or in favor of Palestinian rights, that the regime's not so much. But what about in the Hague group? We have Colombia, South Africa, Bolivia, Malaysia, Namibia. These are these other states. What could their role be, or what are your thoughts on that? Yeah.
Well, they're part of this wonderful movement that we've seen over the last 2 years, where the Global South and global civil society mobilized to articulate the aspirations of the Palestinian people, in contrast to, I would argue, the Arab dictatorships who simply want to cut deals with the United States and with Trump. And so I want to just pick up on what Khalid said about, the need for new leadership. Should it be a reformed PLO or should it be something new? My own view, having given this some considerable thought, that creating something new and using this genocide as historical rupture is actually the better way to go. I would be polite about it and thank the PLO and previous leaderships for the contributions that they've made. But what's really needed now is precisely a representative, broad-based Palestinian national leadership that's global in terms of the Palestinian diaspora, not just the West Bank and Gaza, with a new document and a new vision and a new leadership. Looking at what happened in South Africa, the ANC in 1955 publishes this document called the Freedom Charter that lays out the basic principles of the struggle for democracy in South Africa. We need a new Palestinian Freedom Charter. If it was up to me, just to throw an idea on the table, I would like to get as many, let's say 20, 30 representative, independent Palestinian leaders across the political spectrum to sign their name onto this new document and say, we are starting a new leadership. This genocide in Gaza is a turning point. This is our vision. This is our strategy. And if they were to do that, the response around the world in the Global South, among the countries that you mentioned, among student groups, would be euphoric. It would be euphoric. Now, the problem of doing that is that there are these internal obstacles for creating a new Palestinian leadership that breaks from the old one. One, all of the existing parties that exist, they have their own institutional interests. They don't want to give up anything. Fatah, Palestine, even Hamas. It's a problem. The other problem that a new leadership would face is the Arab states themselves. Arab states themselves don't want to see an independent, accountable, national liberation leadership to form, to speak in the language of democracy and to speak in the language of the Hague Group. The Hague Group is all about international law, accountability, and basic human rights for the Palestinians. That's an anathema to authoritarian regimes. And then the third obstacle that a new Palestinian leadership would face would be the international community themselves, especially in the West. European Union and the United States would not like to see a Palestinian version of the ANC emerge that was independent and that was challenging. But on the plus side, global civil society would love to see that. The Global South, these countries would love to see that. And I think that's really the way to go. But again, I'm not Palestinian, right? So I don't have a direct stake in this. But I think what's so critically needed, and at this moment, is this new leadership. And if you look at other comparative cases, I don't know of any single national liberation struggle that was successful without a credible leadership. South Africa, Ireland, Vietnam. It's sort of the 800-pound gorilla in the corner that's sort of missing. And the question, that I have for the panel and for Professor Khalid is, how do we jumpstart this? Everyone says we need it. Of course we need it. It's pretty clear we need a new, but how do you, what's the catalyst? What do you do? What's the next step? We can all talk about it, but someone's got to do something about it. And I don't know how to do it. I mean, it was up to me. If I had the money, I would organize this meeting. You can even do it online now because everyone has access to the internet. And just say, write the draft of the document, sign, and then you start from there. But those are my thoughts. I think they're really important. I think the Global South would jump at something like this. Everyone would be euphoric. And of course, those regimes that oppose Palestinian national leadership, Israel, the United States, both political parties, would oppose it, but for reasons that I think are worth engaging with.
So much, yeah. I mean, it strikes me that, part of what we're doing here today is kind of a future visioning work project. So I want to turn to you, Sarah Leah. So I like that you are thinking, you and your co-author have come up with this plan, like an off-ramp, as you say. And I wanted to just follow up. I was curious about, would you also envision something kind of down the line, like a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, or, how do you see that maybe that's, sort of medium to long term in a way, but what are your thoughts on sort of how do you get people to live together in the future? Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think transitional justice and transitional justice mechanisms are critically important for cohabitation of multiple nationalities and ethnicities, even on the short term. And so the transitional government, the caretaker government, starts a process of examining truth and reconciliation and different processes for that. But it's not something that attempts to undertake during its brief life as a stepping stone to whatever ultimate governance emerges. Because I think that what that will look like will very much depend on what the population chooses it to look like, whether it's one state or two states. We have very much taken a close look at the lessons of what hasn't worked in processes to sort of wide-scale exclusions of political groups and political parties, like the so-called de-Baathification in Iraq.
Sure.
As a failed example, we have looked at the South African model, which included a lot of truth and reconciliation, but no accountability of any meaningful way. And that certainly did steer South Africa to at least peace. But, we really emphasize that the central and core mission of the transitional government, of the caretaker government, is to end apartheid and occupation and establish the groundwork for democratic decision making. And so issues of how the long-term process for truth and reconciliation is something we leave to the subsequently democratically elected regime or regimes.
Thank you. I like that. That's for the people to decide as they move forward. Yeah. Okay. And maybe one last question for me, just because I'd love to ask Bassam also. I was struck in your talk too, Bassam, when you talked about sort of, well, maybe I should preface this by saying, and so much I think of what we're talking about right now too, we have sort of the extreme power and strength and violence of Israel, but also the weaknesses, the cracks that you talked about purchasing support in the media. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that dichotomy of like extreme, strength and weakness maybe at the same time. And how do we use this moment? Anyway, any thoughts on that or whatever else you'd like to share? Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks. Amini. First of all, I'd like to say that 23 years ago, 23 years ago, this man here, Khalid, and myself met in this building to join the mass program. And it's great to be here with you again.
It was more than 23 years ago.
33 years.
It was-
33
We
years.
were both 4, I think.
Uh,
Babies, yeah.
except he grew taller. Like, okay. So those of us, speaking of the mass program and this center, which is an icon, Center for Contemporary Arab Studies, when we were here, and then, I did my postgraduate work also in this building, in political science, we learned from authors like Nazih Ayubi in his book, Overstating the Arab State, that the Arab state is coercively fierce, but weak in terms of legitimacy and ability to mobilize. This is what Israel is entering into after this genocide. It is absolutely fierce and with a lot of coercive power and beyond nuclear power indeed, but it has lost its legitimacy in the international arena, even among the states, like the populace of the states that underlie its perhaps its longevity or even existence. So we are watching this inverse relationship that I talked about, whereby the more you are losing your legitimacy and your narrative, the more you are investing in your power because you've lost your hegemony, and now you just are, and you end up with the domination. That's the only way you can exercise your power. And that, for some people, it speaks to the end of Zionism today. I don't think so, but I do think it is a particular phase, may or may not be the last phase, but it is something we are seeing on the ground in the United States. We've been seeing it all over the world, but we are seeing it in the United States. I was just in Europe, and it was palpable in countries like Britain and France, and of course, other countries that are much more ahead, including Spain and so on. So I just wanted to, in that comment, I wanted to share that even though this is not quote unquote what a lot of people are wishing for it to be the end not of the people of Israel, but the end of Zionism, the end of the racist structures, the end of apartheid, the end of ethnic cleansing, the end of brutal military occupation, which, by the way, underlies all the above. So it is not a military occupation just for the sake of occupation, but in order to safeguard ethnic cleansing and apartheid, you have to have a military occupation. So because a lot of people try to hide behind the phrase military occupation because they don't want to say the other words that would get you in trouble with the wonderful liberal police state we live in. So yes, we can say a lot more on that, but it's a definitive spiraling down for Israel in terms of its legitimacy of its narratives in the United States. And a lot of people who say this is going to go back to business as usual are not paying attention to the medium run, whereby the demographic, the largest demographic in the United States in the medium run would be the demographic that has actually repudiated Israel's policies, if not, the nature of its institutions before the genocide started. And if we look at social media, if you look at parts of academia, if you look at large swaths of civil society in the United States, you began to see this before October 7th, whereby this generation no longer accepts what Israel is doing, including the sons and daughters of Zionist Americans, whether they are Jewish or not. And that, in my view, is something to pay attention to. But I keep saying, and as I try to end my comments with, nothing's automatic. Nothing's automatic. And this is the time for those of us who have been advocating for various forms of equality, human rights. And I know the word rights sometimes doesn't sit well with some because, it's kind of part of the liberal lexicon that is manipulated and weaponized in ways that are, that are contradictory to what we actually want to happen. But those of us who have been advocating for these things need to actually recognize that the coming phase here, I cannot speak to what's happening inside Palestine, Not because I'm not Palestinian. My co-panelists are very conscientious and polite. I don't mind talking about Palestine, even if I'm not Palestinian, because in my view, Mahmoud Abbas is Palestinian. So I do think that this is a moment for not just for us in the United States to fight the powers that be that are curtailing what is left of democracy, but this is also a moment to think a bit more broadly about what is emerging globally speaking, as well as in the Arab world. A lot of us don't either don't pay attention or don't know that in the Arab world, there are tremors among the youth that may or may not, bear fruit in the short period, but in the medium run, it is not unlikely that we begin to see mobilization that would lead to another phase of what is called Arab uprisings. We are seeing this in Europe. We're seeing this in Latin America. The conversation and the statements by the president of Colombia are not, unrepresentative of what many others would like to say if they had the guts. So there is a movement in that direction, and I think that it starts here in what we actually do, not just say.
Can I
Yeah.
add on to something that Bassam has said that I think, really picks up from the point he was making about Israel's support being something that is paid for. I think there are two observations that I wish could get more attention. First is I think that we are witnessing a global campaign of repression that I don't think we've actually witnessed before by a small state and its supporters trying to control and curtail free expression around the world. I have thought hard about any other example where one state has tried to control what everyone in the world can and can't say about a conflict happening thousands of miles away, and I haven't seen it. And this is the global muscle that Israel and its backers are now seeking to exercise. And the second observation I would make is that therefore it is now a global litmus test of democracy versus autocracy and authoritarianism, because we have this tiny state of Israel with its even tinier base of financial support, primarily here in the United States, from a very, very tiny handful number of individuals that are attempting to quash our democratic freedoms in every democratic state around the world, including in particular the United States and Europe, in order to maintain and secure Israeli occupation apartheid, undermining the very basis on which our democracies exist as democratic states that represent the will of the people, when increasing numbers of Americans do not support Israel or support to Israel, and that is effectively quashed by this tiny group of people. It isn't just about Israel-Palestine, it is about global expression of autocratic control.
Yeah, anything else you want to add before we go to the audience?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
I would like to add.
Okay.
I would like, and I was I'd like to ask, because I was really interested in addressing Iran a little bit, and I know that's because of the circumstances you veered a little bit. I'd love to hear from Nader the connection or impact or relationship between what is the impending attack that everyone's talking about on Palestine, and whether what happened recently, which you addressed eloquently in terms of the quote-unquote peace plan, how does that affect that readiness or that sort of plan?
Yeah, look, very quickly, what I was going to say about Iran prior to Trump's plan was that your framing of total security is a good lens to try and understand what's happening in the region. The United States and Israel are attempting to establish a new political order for the region. In fact, they're explicit about it. When Israel went after Hezbollah, basically crushed it, there was a lot of discussion in the policy circles here, a lot of excitement over what Israel was doing. In fact, there was discussions about a new Sykes-Picot. Israel was proving its worth for the US foreign policy because it was doing things the United States wants to do in the region, but can't do for various, political and economic sort of constraints. And so it's pretty clear what's happening now is that the MAGA Republicans and the Netanyahu crowd are very much interested in, total and full hegemony in the region. And they're going after one by one all of these elements of the axis of resistance, whatever you think about them, in order to establish full hegemony. And so Iran fits into the picture from that perspective, because now that Hamas has been deeply weakened, Hezbollah weakened, perhaps crushed for the foreseeable future, Yemen has taken a big hit, the Houthis, the big actor in the region is Iran, right? And so the plan very much is to, I think, break Iran down. I mean, they wanted regime change, right? It's not, in fact, it had the opposite effect. If you follow what's happening in Iran right now, there's been a surge of nationalism. But I think the plan very much is to turn Iran into another version of Lebanon or Syria, a weak failed state that's surviving but has no ability to project power. And there's broad support for that here in this city on both parties. There's a lot of excitement. People are saying, wow, look at Israel's prowess. It's doing all these wonderful things, and we're fine with it. So just to cite one example, in the June war this summer, look at the press statement that was released by the G7 countries after the war broke out between Israel and Iran and then the United States. They celebrated it. And the argument was that, look, Iran is the biggest destabilizing force in the region. Israel has the right to protect itself. Thrown away completely by these G7 countries was the UN Charter, was any reference to, the rules-based order. It was like full support. And then that raises the question that I was going to talk about. Why is Iran such a bone of contention and such a problem for the United States, for Israel, and for Europe? I think fundamentally the problem with Iran, it's not the internal repressive nature of the regime, which is very repressive and very brutal. It's the fact that Iran is an independent actor in the Middle East. When I say independent actor, it doesn't mean it's a good actor, but it's independent from US foreign policy calculations and decision-making. So Iran's destabilizing role in the Middle East gets amplified as being the biggest cause for regional destabilization. But Saudi Arabia's destabilizing role, the Emirates destabilizing role, and let's not forget, Israel and genocide creates destabilization. None of that is a problem for mainstream US foreign policy and European policy thinkers. That's why Iran is considered to be a big problem. That's why Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon or nuclear program, even though it's been working with the Atomic Energy Agency. Well, Israel can have a program, and no one talks about it. It's these inbuilt double standards. And the connection with Palestine is something that Khalid talked about. Palestinian nationalism, at least historically, prior to Oslo, was an independent actor. It was independent. It bolstered independent sort of mobilization in the region, and you have to crush it. And they've been able to do that with respect to the Palestine Authority and the PLO and Fatah. Other expressions of Palestinian nationalism are still considered to be independent, and they have to be crushed. And that's the way you establish regional hegemony. So I think that's where Iran fits into this picture. And what's so shocking, it just sort of dawned upon me watching these events over the last 2 years. We're back in a moment where it seems like, and it feels like 19th century colonialism all over again, where the region has no self-determination. We will determine who the leaders are. And if you don't agree to that position, you'll get clobbered. And that's how the system works.
But what about the impact of the peace plan on these preparations in light of Trump's Nobel Prize aspirations?
Oh, he didn't get the Nobel Prize. No surprise. He's probably upset. I mean, he probably will. He might change 180 degrees. I didn't get the plan, right? So why should I back it? I think there's a lot of talk that was what was driving him. It's unsure. We can't say with certainty what was driving him. I think very much, if you follow what's happening right now with respect to Iran, I think just today, I saw the headline, so I didn't read the article. There's a big noise now coming out from Netanyahu. Iran has a ballistic missile capacity. It has ICBMs that can hit the United States. This is going to be the new justification for going after Iran again. Because if we saw in the last war in June, the only deterrence that Iran had was its ballistic missiles, which were able to hit Israel. And we now know from the analysis they were much more penetrating and destructive than Israel revealed. So this is a problem. If you want to weaken, your regional adversary, you want to go after them again and justify it. They could use the nuclear program again. We didn't complete the job. It's still there. They have enriched uranium. So this is not going away anytime soon. I think with Trump in power, if you follow also what happened, the justification for the war was Israel attacked in the middle of negotiations between the United States and Iran, right? They were negotiating, they were in the 6th round. It was clear that Netanyahu was able to manipulate Trump. And I think the argument from what I read in reports is he goes to Trump and he says, look, negotiations have stalled. Let us hit Iran a little bit. It'll open up more opportunities and you'll benefit at the negotiating table. And Trump was convinced and it opened the door to this war.
That's Israel's favorite time to.
Yeah, and it could easily happen again. So I don't think we're beyond this. I mean, all the predictions are from all the people I respect who follow this more closely. This is just what happened in the summer. It's just the first phase of more attacks on Iran to weaken it, to break it down. And we're still in the early years of the Trump administration. So this is just, the story is just beginning. It's not ending.
So we have about a half hour. We've got time for some questions. Okay, maybe we'll take a few. Okay, so we've got Omar, that's right, Omar, Steve, and in the back there. Let's do 3 and then we'll do like 3 more. So please go
I
ahead.
just actually have like a couple comments for Nada, if you don't mind.
Okay.
One, I totally share the opinion that the absolute essential priority is the revival of Palestinian representative politics. But I would just push back on the idea that it's so maybe not so simple, but that the answer is to, have 30 prominent Palestinians sign off on a freedom charter, and that will, the international community is going to rally around that. One, you also, like, by starting an alternative institution, you risk fragmenting the Palestinian body politic, like, even more than it already is. And you mentioned a bunch of obstacles that are in the way, both with Palestinians in the Arab world and then more broadly. And I think all those things are true. And they stand in the way. And there are many efforts since October 7th, especially to do this type of work. And all of them are failing for a number of reasons. So that point. When it comes to the Trump plan, the 20-point proposal, and I think your critique is very valid. I also don't think you can look at it in vacuum, because look at the trajectory of where we were headed. Israel certainly didn't want, I mean, it may have revised, Netanyahu may have revised this plan to suit his interest and Israel's interest, but the objective, I think, for Netanyahu was the ethnic cleansing and the destruction of Gaza. And Trump had endorsed that with his Gaza Riviera plan. That might be ludicrous and detached from reality, but I think that's where we're headed. So I think I think why we're here is also for what Khaled said, the turning point that happened after the overreach in Qatar, the attack and the embarrassment and uncomfortable position Trump was put in, and the kind of unity that we're seeing for the first time between a bunch of these Arab Muslim states, and also a kind of a growing alliance with Europe that's happening, that's really isolating the Israelis and the Americans, and I think putting the Trump administration in a difficult position. So that's why we're there. And I think the overriding priority is to stop the genocide. And so, yes, it's a horrible agreement, but if that overriding objective can be met by having this bad plan, and then you create all kinds of opportunities to navigate that with the agency that Khaled was discussing on. So thank you.
You want me to respond, or? Yeah, so very quickly, look, Palestinian Freedom Charter Plan was just sort of an idea that I hadn't talked about it. I'm not saying it's the way to go.
Yeah.
What I am convinced about is the status quo is untenable. We need some new energy. And so the choices seem to me, in terms of reviving either trying to reform the existing institutions or parties, which I think are so corrupt and beyond reform because they have external backers and or you try something new. What that new option is, I don't know. I think that's a much easier way to go. I would love to see a broadly representative, unified leadership that brings in everyone from across the spectrum. That strikes me as an easier way, but again, it's up to Palestinians to decide. And in terms of the Trump plan, look, you seem to be suggesting that there's something there to celebrate. It's better than, every other option. Look, it's good that the war is stopped and there's some reprieve for the Palestinians, but this Arab and Muslim unity that you talked about, I don't think that's anything to celebrate. I think there's a lot of options that these Arab and Muslim states had that could have pressured and made a difference. And this gets back to sort of something that Khaled said that I wanted to ask him about. But there are examples where in the past Arab states did, organize to put pressure on Israel to get concessions over, regional politics and the question of Palestine. People forget this. The problem with Arab states right now is they're not even willing to defend their own peace plan that they used to adhere to. I'm talking about the 2002 Saudi plan, no recognition for Israel until they, agree to international law. When the Abraham Accords were signed, the Israelis and Netanyahu were boasting, see, I told all of you other people in the international community, land for peace is not going to work. All of the Arab states came and capitulated. But the one point that I think bears on this moment that I've talked about before is what happened in 1973, where then King Faisal organized regional countries to issue an oil boycott on the United States for its backing of Israel. And reportedly, there's a moment where Henry Kissinger flies to Riyadh and meets with King Faisal. I'm not sure if this story is 100% accurate or not, but according to the reports that I read, he meets with King Faisal. Henry Kissinger just shocked, and he tries to appeal to King Faisal's sense of self-interest. What are you doing this oil boycott for? It's bad for your economy and your development plans. And reportedly, King Faisal turns to Henry Kissinger and says, Dr. Kissinger, we are a simple people. We were raised in the desert on dates and goat milk. And if need be, we will go back to that life, but we will not abandon the Palestinians. That's where the transcript ends. But can you imagine Henry Kissinger seeing an Arab leader talk like that today?
Can you imagine an Arab leader saying this?
I can't. So there's been a decline in terms of I think that my reading of it, and I think what other people have to say, is that, just the overall character of Arab states with respect to the question of Palestine, they've become more corrupt, more dependent on the West, more in favor of striking deals with anyone, and abandoning any sort of political moral principle.
The critique is valid.
So I don't have any hope that these Arab states, when you said there's the Arab states unity that we've seen in this, Trump plan is something to celebrate. I don't think so. I don't see it. I mean, one thing the Arab states simply could have done, and it wouldn't cost them very much, withdraw your ambassadors from Israel.
There's no question.
I mean, withdraw your ambassadors. Don't boycott anyone. Just say there's a genocide going on. We're not going to have diplomatic relations. Not even that. In fact, what we know has happened, and Netanyahu has actually said this if you listen closely, is internally, quietly, in private discussion, the Arab states are telling Netanyahu, finish the job in Gaza because the existence of this resistance movement is a threat to us. There's actually a deep alliance there between these Arab dictatorships and Israel and the United States. That's not obviously in the interest of the Palestinians. So I don't share any sort of enthusiasm that there's some silver lining here in recent developments with respect to the Arab state, Trump's plan.
I just want to make a couple points in relation to Omar's questions. I think the question of how to go about reviving a Palestinian political leader or creating a new political leadership, there's precedent in Palestinian history for both, right? So after 1948, there was the old leadership was completely swept away, the Mufti and the Arab Higher Committee, whatever.
Yeah.
And then after 1967, there was, when Fatah then took over the PLO, right, and the other sort of made it into what it was. I think it will come down to a question of how discredited are those institutions, right? So after 1948, the Mufti and that leadership was completely discredited. There was nothing that they could say that mattered in that context. This is going to contradict what I said earlier, but this is much more like 1948, this moment, than it is like 1967. But also it has its own realities. I still think it will be better for a future leadership to kind of to come out of an existing institution. Maybe then they will form something different, but at least use the shell of the existing apparatus, right, to carve out something new. But the second point is on the role of the Arab states. Again, just to come back to this point about Palestinian agency, as long as Palestinians are not actors, and by that they have to be a unitary actor, right? Obviously there's a multiplicity of voices. All movements have diversity and pluralism, but you can't have two leaderships. You can't have four leaderships. Until Palestinians can assert their agency, for better or worse, the Arab states will pick up the slack, and they will pursue the Palestine issue in ways that suit their interests rather than those of Palestinians. So again, it emphasizes this imperative that this is the moment to create a credible, minimally representative leadership.
I realized I went back on what I said we were gonna do, so I'll take the reins again. Sorry about that, everyone. So let me, I'm gonna read a question from the audience online, and then we'll go with a few, with
Really quick.
a couple others. Okay, let me do this so I don't lose the thread here. Okay. This is for Sarah Leah. What's the incentive for the Israelis in this blueprint? Their government massacred people with impunity, but with reception and applause. Recall Congress is applauding for Netanyahu. What would make the shift to create an incentive? So that's number one. Okay, Steve, please.
Yeah, I just thought with the new freedom charter and all that, maybe think back to the first World Zionist Congress. Get the global South, global civil society, and diaspora, which is probably the most important thing that I've been thinking about this whole time. Is this from the diaspora, the Palestinian diaspora, which is powerful in so many ways, come together and lead this charge by everybody but the creeps. Is that anyway? Put that on the back burner.
Number two, and in the back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You gotta stand and close the door. Thank you. Things. I'm gonna start from where we ended, perhaps, and it was the interventions were great of talking about the material power of things, and it's great that in the kind of discussions we're getting into these ideas of the immaterial parts of it. And Nader, you mentioned something around this seems to be a 19th century moment of colonialism where everybody's like rid of their agency, but I think it actually isn't, because 19th century colonialism, governments and peoples were against it, right? It was like our land is being taken by force. And now we see this change where there was Arab leaders consenting to this, being complicit in it fully, right? And I don't think we can have this conversation without intertwining it with two pieces. One is neoliberal governmentality and the depoliticization of everything. So just the logic of neoliberal governmentality that all these Arab governments got themselves deeply mired in. And at the same time, the idea of the logic that comes with it that is related to and like, we're gonna have to say it, like there is an enamorment with Israeli power in Arab governments.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow how this happened, I'm concerned with like, how did we get here? How did we get that these Arab governments have this enamorment with this power, not seeing it as an occupatory power, but like as a power to like ally with and just deal realistically with it as a material power. And also, like, you know, you mentioned the King Faisal example, and now we've got this other generation of MBS and BZ and Tamim and all that. You've got this generation that is also enamored by Western logics of thinking, right? And supporting their universities, being educated in those universities. And I'm not saying these universities are monolithic, and we're one of them. We're talking about what we're talking about. But again, we've got a generation of people enamored by Western thought and thinking, and thinking that this is the way for the societies to go. And so then this makes me all question this idea of whatever solutions or horizons we're thinking about that are related to state building. How would that be any different? State building is using the rules of the game in which Arab states, let's not say governments, but like peoples don't get to win by the rules of the game that are related to state building. I don't know how this would be any different from after Oslo, and how it could be based on any vocabulary or lexicon that is related to democracy or human rights, or even the dialect of democracy and autocracy, if it's not based on a new imaginary of like a liberation lexicon.
Look, this is a long conversation. I detected in your comment that we needed some sort of radical break from anything that has to do with Western norms or ideas in terms of state building. But I wouldn't be that monolithic in terms of categorizing the entire Western tradition as producing this particular moment. I mean, let's not forget all of these leaders for independence in the global South, like Gandhi, like, you know, pick any national liberation struggle you want, drew upon Western political traditions and theories to justify their own struggles for independence, human rights, and national self-determination. So it's not as monolithic as you sort of seem to imply, if I read you correctly. I agree with a lot of the other points that you made, but I still think we can draw upon a progressive reading of sort of Western liberal thought, for example, or the human rights tradition to help emancipatory movements for human rights and democracy and freedom in our part of the world.
In terms of the incentive structure of what would make the Israeli people say uncle, there have been volumes and volumes written and hundreds and thousands of activist hours dedicated to creating the external political conditions that would bring the Israeli people to say uncle. We, with this blueprint, are trying to add to that incentive for international states to act, to sanction and punish Israel as it deserves, by providing a vision of what can replace the current reality. But just as the South African white public ultimately agreed to give up their power, to give up their apartheid, because they could no longer sustain exclusion and isolation from the world. Perhaps Israelis will decide that they want to be part of the international community, that they don't want to live in forever wars. That is, of course, also taking the lives of many Jewish Israeli soldiers. That they want to be able to travel the world and study the world and participate in global sporting events. That there's a better option. And just as there is a changing mentality among young people here in the United States with respect to their views, certainly there can be that change among Jewish Israeli youth, because the current reality is not very pleasant. I think many Israelis now hide their Israeli identities when they travel around the world, and it's not a very comfortable or happy place to be when your existence relies purely on the very hard power that Bassam was describing. So, obviously we're far away from that. But I think an essential ingredient is having a plan, is having a different vision and a different alternative that breaks from the failures of the Oslo process.
See, I know we've got, oh, wow. Okay, we've got a bunch. There's, I'm gonna read one more and then let's take 1, 2, and Jonathan, we'll try to do as well. Okay, we probably can do one more round. So online we have, at this critical moment, what is the role of the intellectual elite in the Middle East, especially in Jordan and Egypt? So that's number 1. Please.
Hi. So my question is primarily for Sarah, but I would love to hear the rest of the panel's opinions on this issue as well. So Sarah, a second ago, you said something very interesting about you were using the South Africa case study as an example, and you said that in South Africa, when they had their Truth and Reconciliation Commission, there was reconciliation, but a lack of accountability, and that ultimately kind of that did lead to peace ultimately in the long run. So my question is, given the South Africa case study, as well as other democratic transitions without accountability, such as post-Pinochet Chile, post-Franco Spain, to what extent are accountability and reconciliation mutually exclusive?
Okay, we'll take you please, and then Jonathan, and then we'll do the round.
My question actually feeds off very similar to Caleb's question, and I wanted to ask specifically what role you see international institutions playing in the specific peace plan right now. I mean, I know this didn't pass through the UN, but the UN chief has called for Israel and Hamas to abide by what the peace plan has called for. But also, we must recognize that the ICC has an arrest warrant for Netanyahu. Like, does this mean that none of that really, is still existing or not? Like, if the peace plan followed, would he be able to travel? Like, I'm just not sure how the peace plan, the concreteness of it, without a larger international institution, where does the international law enforcement come from if this is just a US plan? That's kind of my question that feeds off with Caleb's as well.
Yeah, quick comment before the question, which would be, I would say, like, making Israel say Uncle Sam, and that it's an total arms embargo, which you've discussed many times. And the question would be, I'm really glad that there's a lot of talk today about the idea of a revitalizing the Palestinian national movement. And I would agree that you cannot reform or update it because the entire PA and by extension the PLO is corrupt and complicit. And so you have to create something new. And you have to, the one assumption that I'm interested to hear the panelists take on is that, to me, it seems like it has to be deeply involve the diaspora, because you cannot recreate the PLO on the same mistake that it made, which was cutting off from the diaspora, because otherwise it just kind of results in the same spot that the Palestinian Authority is. But the question is, what are the specific or general domains or frontiers of knowledge production that we can all contribute to that would make the establishment of a, for lack of a better term, a World Palestinian Congress more achievable?
You want to go first, please?
Sure. Just on truth versus accountability. I mean, this is a massive topic and will take long to discuss. And these are fights we had at Human Rights Watch over, for example, the Colombian peace deal, which didn't include accountability. I really think that it is up to the democratic polity to determine exactly what truth and accountability should look like in their context, in their local context. And that is, I think, the recommendation of everyone involved in truth and accountability from a practicum perspective. And I don't think that those outcomes and answers should be dictated by people who don't have to actually live face to face with people who may have abused them or harmed them and so forth. And that is why under the blueprint, we set up a process of discussing various options for truth and accountability, but allow the democratic polity to decide. On the conversations that are happening about the Palestinian national movement and the need for a Palestinian national movement, I think one of the things that the blueprint tries to do is to move the onus away from what the Palestinians en masse, en bloc must do or must not do, or who they should be represented by and how they should be represented as sort of a fundamental critical condition for moving out of the current state of affairs, ending Israeli occupation and apartheid, and establishing democratic governments on principles of equality and democracy. In that sense, I think the blueprint deprioritizes that mentality and approach of seeing this as exclusively a problem of national identity and national liberation, to seeing it first as a problem of crime and ending the crimes of occupation and apartheid that cannot be negotiated. We're not going to negotiate whether or not we end apartheid and occupation based on some kind of peace agreement between the blob of Palestine that has one voice and the blob of Jewish Israelis that have another voice. I think instead that part of our approach for the blueprint is premised on elevating the democratic voices of individual human beings in a secret vote who may or may not align with everything that their fellow Palestinians want or believe in, particularly on the secular religious divide, for example. Similarly, with Israeli Jews, we don't want to flatten them into a one-dimensional, one-voice block. And the problem, I think, with trying to put eggs in the basket of the Palestinian national voice is, particularly given the diversity of Palestinian national voices that are now around the globe. I just don't think they can be flattened in that way efficiently or effectively, and that the best way to seek the opinions of human beings across religious, political, national identity lines is through a vote.
Senator Kylie, anything you want to add?
I have an inappropriate thing to say.
Okay.
Is that okay? Are we on?
Yes, we are. Say it out loud.
I'm gonna say it because, we also here live in a police state like the elites in Jordan and Egypt. The role of the intellectuals, that's the question. What is their, I think it is to like develop, balls and ovaries. And speak up.
Balls and ovaries.
And speak up, because this is a very important part of our history, this moment. And people have been, and I follow the, well, less so the Jordanian, although it's less, probably sometimes a bit more difficult. But in Egypt, a lot of people are speaking, as I was saying earlier, there are tremors happening under the radar. And given what Israel is doing, this is actually a time where you can actually expand the envelope. I mean, we're trying to do it here all the time. And, I know that people are being arrested and, we are ourselves under investigation at my university. And I'm probably, part of this cohort that is under investigation. But you've got to speak out. And now there's a moment where you could actually, where you have a masaha, you have a space now more than before, to actually, guide this new generation that's waiting for us and for intellectuals in those two countries, for instance, to speak out. And you know this from, if you follow blogs and websites in the Arab world, there's a lot of hunger for new material. There's a lot of hunger for some sort of leadership, which is absent from their governments. So I do think that would be the role, is to basically say the quiet things out loud that everyone, well, most people are contemplating.
I have to say with strong reservations, because the freedom that we have, and no matter the police state we're living in, so far is not comparable. We have
Absolutely,
documented,
absolutely.
just one, we have documented a Palestinian, a Jordanian of Palestinian origin who was killed in police custody because he was putting out flyers about the Gaza genocide. We have documented the case of a young a Jordanian of Palestinian origin who was blinded, beaten so viciously in a Jordanian prison that he was blinded. And so the reason we're not seeing protesters anymore in Jordan is because it is at pain of death. It is at pain of imprisonment. So that's the caveat for what the elites or the ordinary masses in the Middle East are facing.
No, I mean, there's no comparison. I mean, people, like, I was doing a show actually yesterday in the day before yesterday in London, and there's this understanding that we are facing XYZ in Washington. I was asked that question, and I emphasized that there's really still, until today, no comparison. But there is a moment, especially in the past few months, where you could expand the envelope. And this can also happen in the realm of arts and culture, not directly in the realm of, politics. It can also happen in terms of Jordanian and Egyptian elites that are not necessarily based in the countries, but there is no escape from basically reinventing or bringing back a discourse which can actually be, free of the kind of sensitive topics. I mean, everyone knows what these topics are. Even in Syria, under the Assad regime, there are, key words and key formulations that you can avoid and still make a point. It's not hopeless.
Thanks, Gaza. We are at the hour, so I think we're just gonna need to end it there. Thank you so much for attending. Thanks so much to the panelists.